Welcome to the first MedRT educational webinar. This series of webinars is intended to help NDF-RT users make the transition to MedRT. Our assumption if you're watching this webinar is that you are already familiar with NDF-RT. In this first video, we will introduce you to MedRT and discuss how MedRT differs from NDF-RT. We will also cover why the transition from NDF-RT to MedRT is occurring. The vision of MedRT is threefold. The new model includes 4 full terminologies. RX norm ingredient concepts are now used as the cornerstone of MedRT. And MedRT will now be maintained and published from a new environment. Let's discuss these pivotal changes in a bit more detail. The first is that MedRT uses 4 complete terminologies, with MedRT providing navigational relationships between RX norm, MESH, and SNOMED CT. In NDF-RT, only copies of the terms in the external terminologies were used, and you could not navigate between and within each terminology. The second major difference is that RX norm is now used as the source of drug ingredients, whereas previously the source was VA NDF. RX norm is the primary accepted and most ubiquitous drug terminology, and therefore we believe it to be an optimal source to build MedRT from. The last major difference is that the maintenance and publication environment is now Apollon's open source distributed terminology system, or DTS. MedRT will be published in DTS format, as well as a custom XML format. The use of DTS allows us to navigate within and between each terminology, which was not possible in previous tooling. This allows us to take full advantage of the knowledge bases represented in these standards. A common question that we receive is why the transition from NDF-RT to MedRT is occurring. Think of how the telephone has evolved over time. The same can be said for clinical terminologies. Due to increased use and institutional requirements, all terminologies have grown and evolved over time. Terminology models and content have also changed over time. NDF-RT was put into production in 2003, and much has changed since its inception. For example, the established pharmacologic classes were not introduced until 2009. Also, NDF-RT had around 39,000 concepts in 2009 and is now over 45,000 concepts. Another reason for the growth and evolution of terminologies is increased accessibility. These days, anyone can go online and access tools like RxNav, the SNOMED browser, and the MESH browser to retrieve information on the spot. The availability of mappings between clinical terminologies also provides us interoperability between them. The tools used to maintain, publish, and view these terminologies have also evolved. We now have the ability to look at multiple terminologies and even create links between them. Another reason for the transition is to plan ahead for potential changes in VA terminology. NDF-RT relies on the VA NDF patch. If that patch is discontinued at some point, then there would be no updates to NDF-RT. MedRT provides us with an alternate source for ingredients so that the pharmacologic classification concepts and the relationships from NDF-RT can continue to be maintained. Just like its predecessor, the medication reference terminology, more commonly referred to as MedRT, is a reference terminology. A reference terminology is defined as a set of concepts and relationships that provide a common reference point for comparisons and aggregation of data. In this diagram, we see the 3 levels of the MedRT pyramid that make up the reference terminology. At the base of the pyramid, we have the drug ingredients, which are sourced from RX norm. The middle of the pyramid represents the interoperability level. This section holds relationships that connect concepts in each level of the pyramid, as well as other attributes like properties, synonyms, and IDs. At the top of the pyramid is the reference terminology level. This section holds the MedRT classification terms, such as the MOAs, PEs, and EPCs. It also contains standard terminologies, that we will reference, such as MESH and SNOMED-CT. This diagram compares the content model structures of NDF-RT to MED-RT. The triangles represent hierarchies of related concepts, while the rectangles represent different categories of concepts. Each of the 4 colored rectangles represents a different terminology, with blue being MED-RT and the other colors being the external terminologies that are referenced by MED-RT. To recap, this knowledge base employs 4 terminologies: MED-RT, RX-norm, MESH, and SNOMED-CT. The most notable change in MED-RT is that RX-norm is now the source of drug ingredients instead of NDF. Here we see both the ingredients and clinical drugs categories used to come from VA NDF, and in MED-RT, the source is RX-norm. The VA drug classification shown here goes away in MED-RT. The chemical classifications of ingredients still uses MESH as the source. However, portions of MESH were formerly copied into NDF-RT, and now we can reference those directly in the true MESH hierarchy. The same is true of diseases for indications. Previously, in NDF-RT, these concepts were copied from MESH. Now, in MED-RT, they will be directly referenced through associations. The established pharmacologic classes, mechanism of action, and physiologic effect concepts were maintained in NDF-RT through collaboration with the Interagency Expert Panel. This process will remain the same in MED-RT. One source addition in MED-RT is SNOMED-CT. Associations from EPCs to SNOMED-CT concepts used to only be represented by property values. Now, these concepts are referenced directly. Now that we understand how the concept models of the 2 terminologies differ, let's look at how the hierarchies differ in DTS. On the left side of the screen, we are looking at NDF-RT. Note that terminologies are called namespaces in DTS. On the right side is MED-RT and its 3 external terminologies: MESH, RX-norm, and SNOMED-CT. The mechanism of action hierarchy in NDF-RT is maintained exactly the same in MED-RT, and so its hierarchy structure remains unchanged. Our first change is the chemical ingredients hierarchy. Previously, this hierarchy consisted of copied portions of MESH. Now that we are able to reference MESH directly, that hierarchy goes away. MESH is now an external terminology in the MED-RT world. Just like the MOA hierarchy, the clinical kinetics, or PK hierarchy, still is owned by MED-RT and remains in the MED-RT hierarchy. The disease findings hierarchy, just like the chemical ingredient hierarchy, is now referenced directly in MESH. Therefore, the copied over concepts from MESH in NDF-RT are no longer required. In NDF-RT, the pharmaceutical preparations hierarchy stored information about drug ingredients. The EPCs remain here in MED-RT. The drug products by generic ingredient combinations, an alphabetized list of ingredients, also remains, but now provides associations to RX-norm ingredients instead of ingredients in NDF. The notable change in pharmaceutical preparations hierarchy is that the drug products by VA class goes away now that RX-norm is being used as the source of ingredients as an external terminology. Just like the MOAs, EPCs, and PKs, the PE and TC hierarchies continue to be owned and maintained by MED-RT, and the hierarchies remain unchanged. The concepts from the 4 terminologies used in MED-RT all have their own unique native concept identifiers. MED-RT concepts have NUIs, which have been persisted from NDF-RT. In DTS, the identifiers on these 3 external terminologies are all represented as the code and source. RX-norm uses the RX-CUI, SNOMED uses the SCT ID, and MESH uses the MUI as their identifiers. Now that we understand the major differences of the content model and structures of NDF-RT and MED-RT, let's take a look at the same ingredient in each terminology. Please keep in mind that these images have been edited for training purposes. On the left, we see a tenolol in NDF-RT. On the right, we see a tenolol in RxNorm in the MED-RT world. Note that there are associations that are italicized on this concept. Associations and other attributes asserted by external terminologies, in this case MED-RT, are italicized so that we can recognize them easily. Anything in regular font is strictly from RxNorm in this case. When an attribute is italicized, we can tell which source the association type and target concept live in by looking at its tags. We can easily identify that the preparations and EPC concepts are from MED-RT in this case, as well as the child of association type. In NDF-RT, the parent concepts used to create the hierarchy are represented as superconcepts in DTS. Because MED-RT is a set of associations between standards rather than relationships within just one standard, the relationship type changes to child of. While these parental relationships differ by name, the intent is the same. In this association, the contraindicated role is pointing to a copied over mesh concept that lives in NDF-RT. In MED-RT, it appears to point to the same concept, but this time the association points to the actual disease-finding concept from mesh. Note the tag at the end of the concept name. Likewise, this has ingredient NDF-RT role points to a copy of a chemical ingredient concept, but the association in MED-RT points to the actual concept in mesh. Again, we see the mesh tag that indicates the concept source. In this webinar, we learned about why the transition to MED-RT is occurring and covered the differences between NDF-RT and MED-RT. If you have any questions about MED-RT or this presentation, the MED-RT team can be contacted at medrt@jpsys.com.